Hi, Eddie. Hi, Liz. I see you, Peter.
Hi, Lydia.
Hi.
How you doing?
I'm good. I'm good. I'm going to send a text to the colleagues and see. It's about 10 minutes before or 2 minutes before 10. So just to everyone, I'm going to round up my colleagues, make sure that they are, if they can make it, they make it. And then we'll probably start no later than 10:05. Okay?
Okay.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning, Liz.
Hi, Liz. Hi, Nisa. Hi, Mike. We're
Morning.
gonna give it. Good morning. We're only waiting for a little bit for more of the colleagues to sign on and some of the
Morning.
invited guests. How you doing?
Everybody's good here. How are you guys?
Hi, Madam Chair.
Hi, sorry for delaying that. We're just gonna wait for a couple more of the colleagues to sign on and then we'll get started. Thank you all for coming on time. Who do we just have? I see Ricardo also joined us, and did Kenzie as well? Yeah, okay.
Yep, I'm here.
Andrea too, I see you just joined. All right, I think we have as many folks as we're gonna get. All right, we're just gonna go ahead and get started. I see Armani and Justin, thank you for joining us as well. I think we were gonna be joined by Pam. And thank you, Counselor Baker, also here. And Counselor Wu. And I was just checking for the Research Municipal Bureau if Pam is here yet. She's not here yet. Okay. We haven't gotten testimony from her yet. Okay. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and get started. Make sure my camera's working. Good morning, everyone. Today is Thursday, August 6th. This is a hearing order or hearing on docket 0851 for an amendment to the Boston City Charter pursuant to 43B 10B. I'm Lydia Edwards. I'm chair of the Committee on Government Operations, and I sponsored this docket and was referred to the committee on July 8th. The committee is now holding today's first hearing on this. In accordance with Governor Baker's March 12th executive order modifying certain requirements of the open meeting law, we are able to have the City Council will be conducting this hearing virtually on Zoom. This enables the City Council to carry out its responsibilities and to adhere to public health accommodations. The public may watch this meeting via live stream at www.boston.gov/city-council-tv. It will also be rebroadcasted at a later date on Comcast 8/RCN82/Verizon1964. Written comments may be sent to the committee email at ccc.go@boston.gov and will be part of the record and available to all counselors. This is just a brief note about today's hearing. This is part of the process required under 43B. Under this provisions of this section, the local legislative body may propose a charter amendment specifically through a written request by a city councilor to the city clerk. I have done that. This written request then initiates a mandatory timeline, which we are now on, by which the city council must hold a public hearing, which we're having today. And we must advertise that public hearing in a newspaper, which we have done, and ultimately take final action within 6 months. We are not there yet. That is all necessary in order for us to get the ballot question on the ballot for November 2021. If ultimately we pass it out of our body, it would go to the Attorney General's office. She must confirm its constitutionality, and then it goes to the ballot, excuse me. This is, again, part of a mandatory timeline under 43B 10B. And so as a result, we're having this hearing today. I want to be very clear about the specific goals of today. It is to discuss and form the ballot question that we would like to see on the ballot in November 2021. It is to discuss how we can change and democratize our budgeting process in the city of Boston. It's to look at the ways in which we're currently functioning and really question if there's better ways. And the only way to change our budgeting functions is to change the charter. Ultimately, it would allow for us to increase, decrease certain line items, to generate a budget, and to also allow for the public to directly vote on participatory budgeted items or funding that we set aside. What it does not do is allow for the city council or the mayor to increase taxes. We're still dealing with the funding that we have, which is about a $3 billion budget. Why now? Well, if anyone was around in June of this past year, this budgeting cycle, what they would have been on part of is a robust conversation from all angles, asking us to do so many things with the budget and allocate differently, or at least perceive our budget process differently. And there are so many different perspectives, but I want to be very clear, this is not part of anyone's agenda. This is literally asking and forming a ballot question for the voters of Boston to determine how and who and under what timeline their money will be allocated. That's it. What this can do and help answer questions is for folks who are concerned about allocations for law enforcement. It could also be dealing with questions about allocations for our school budget. Many people are concerned about the accountability of district city councilors to their district. Other people are concerned in as much as they feel that their district is contributing more than it's getting. And some people feel that their district never got a fair shake in this conversation. It also is going to be dealing with full-on transparency. You're going to watch us as we negotiate and discuss what we think should happen in our budget. Right now, whether you want to believe it or not, many of us are having those discussions about the budget directly with the mayor, but you're not aware of them. This is bringing that sunlight to that process. But in bringing that sunlight, we're also bringing ourselves and the community to the table. That, I think, is very important. This is also about not just the allocation of money, but about systemic reform, which I think in many cases, throughout all aspects of our lives, we've been called to answer, to come up with a way of performing how we do business. So this is a suggestion. This is a draft. We're going to look at all sorts of different ways. And part of this conversation is for my colleagues to have suggestions, what they do or don't like about this specific proposal. For the community to also say what they do and don't like and make suggestions for this proposal. And we're now part of forming the question that I hope will be part of the ballot on November 2021. This is so that people have more of a say in how we do business. I think it's a good thing. I think it makes us more democratic. I don't believe an up or down, yes or no vote is truly a democratic process that accounts for the many needs and calls and cries for not only change, but also for transparency and accountability. It makes us better fiscal stewards as counselors. It makes us more accountable actually to the public. With that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleagues if they would have any, in order of their arrival, if they have any opening statements. Then we have several guests here today, again, to discuss this, this particular ballot and make suggestions or concerns, this ballot question. After this, I expect that we will have a working session. And ultimately, I will bring this back to my colleagues for a final vote for the question that they feel comfortable, that the community has told them that they want to be placed on the ballot in November 2021. Very well, in order of arrival, my colleagues, I have Councillor Flynn, Councillor Braden, Councillor Sabi George, Councillor Flaherty, Councillor Block, Councillor Arroyo, Councillor Campbell, Councillor Baker, and Councillor Wu. Have I missed anybody? Very well. Councillor Flynn.
Thank you. Thank you, Councilor Edwards. Thank you, Councilor Edwards, for filing this amendment and having this important conversation about the role of the city council in molding the city budget. As you mentioned in your opening comments, Councilor Edwards, the city council has limited power in crafting the budget, although we meet constantly with the mayor's team during that process. The city councilors are on the ground. We're talking to residents every day, whether it's at the supermarket, at the ballpark, picking our kids up at school. So we're talking to residents every day, probably 7 days a week. And we know the important needs of our district and neighborhoods, as does the mayor know the important needs and districts needs of the city as well. I think it's a fair debate and an important debate to see how the city council can be more engaged in the budget process, weighing in on the budget process, and not just weighing in with a yes or a no on the budget vote. I'm also looking forward to this conversation on how the city council and the mayor's team can work closely with us on the city budget that reflects the needs of our constituents. I also know that even during this period of uncertainty, Councilor Bach during this process was very engaging. We worked closely with the mayor's team, with our colleagues in governments. That was a positive development. So I hope that we're able to continue that positive interaction with the mayor's team and with our Ways and Means chair, because it's a very important part of the process. Going up to the budget vote in the future. Again, thank you, Councilor Edwards, and appreciate the opportunity to be heard.
Thank you. Councilor Braden?
Good morning, Councillor Edwards, Madam Chair. Thank you for your leadership on this important issue. I have a lot to learn as a new councillor about this whole budgeting process, but I really feel in our past budget, my first experience was a level of frustration that the City Council doesn't have more direct input into the formulation of the budget itself, rather than just getting to an up and down vote at the end of the process. We've all heard from our constituents across the city and from my constituents in my neighbourhood about concerns and issues that they would like the budget to reflect. And I really feel that this process that you've just initiated and that you're leading on is incredibly important. I hope we can have a thorough discussion and hopefully advance a more participatory budgeting process that better reflects the needs of all our neighbourhoods in the city. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Sabi George.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you everyone who's here today. I look forward to hearing from you all and being the experts sort of in this field. Looking forward to the information that you have to share. In the end, I think this conversation is about where control and where power lies, and the documents that organize our city and determine where that power lies are very important documents, and that certainly is our city charter. So excited about this conversation, and also anxious about this conversation, because the decisions that we make here and make as a body and put before the voters in the city of Boston can really change the course of our city in what I hope is a very positive way. So excited and anxious about today's conversation and certainly the sessions ahead. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Flaherty. Councillor Flaherty. I will come back to Councillor Flaherty. He was on. I think he may have a connection problem. Councillor Bach.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to echo everyone's thanks for having this conversation and for proposing a charter amendment. I certainly feel, as Ways and Means Chair, like, we tried this year to have as robust of a process as possible, reviewing all the departmental budgets, but in our current process, there isn't enough opportunity for sort of a second shoe to drop of the council actually working with the mayor to integrate the things that we learn along the way and the sort of insights that come up as we scrutinize each department about where we could be putting more resources or shifting resources. And to me, I think there's a mismatch between the charter power that the council has and what sort of your everyday citizen expects the legislative branch of its city to be able to do. I think it's completely reasonable that people assume that their legislators can, amend a budget. And realistically, in most, certainly up at the State House and other places, the legislative body originates the budget. I think that, I'm looking forward to this conversation. Some folks who have spent a bunch of time thinking about the charter. I think that thinking about how a budget gets originated and sort of how the insight from our departments about what they see as their needs gets integrated at the beginning is something that we want to think through. But to me, the biggest piece here is giving the council the ability to respond to that reasonable expectation of citizens in our city that we can amend the budget. And also, I really, would like to figure out how we integrate a more real opportunity for participatory budgeting into our process, and whether, we may not be able to lay out all the steps for that in a charter amendment. And as you know, I've filed a hearing order to look at how we could do more participatory budgeting within the existing charter framework, which we'll be taking up this fall. But I think that certainly a charter amendment could help open a wider window for that. And I think it's always important for us to be thinking about ways to make our institutions more small d democratic. So thank you so much for initiating this conversation today, and I'm excited to be here.
Thank you. Counselor Arroyo.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think this conversation has been long overdue. As we think about, the historical process that removed budgetary powers from the City Council in the first place, I think it's important to note that that was done at the time specifically based on anti-Irish sentiment and the idea of removing the body's ability at the time to truly represent what the population that had elected that City Council to the table to do was able to do as a way to control and really manipulate the way that the budget process is done, and that the fact that we can't do line item amendments and we can't shape the budget was done to disenfranchise, not to enfranchise. And I think as we have this conversation, it's really important to understand that this system works the way it does now to exclude. And so as we move forward, I look forward to creating a question that we eventually put on the ballot that gives a democratic process to the budget in a real way and brings more voices in, not less. Thank you.
Counselor, thank you very much. Counselor Campbell.
Thank you, Counselor Edwards, for hosting the conversation. I am looking forward to it. This is, like many of my colleagues have said, long overdue. And, for me, I believe in checks and balances. It's extremely difficult to do that, to hold the administration accountable, to effectively represent the constituents we serve with such limited power, not just with respect to the budget, but appointments, to our department heads. The list is long. And it's quite shocking when you compare our council to other major cities and their city councils and the authorities and power they have to do their jobs. It's stark in contrast. And so I really am excited for this conversation. I do think it's long overdue. And I will add, we are obviously in many conversations now around education, reopening, policing reform, economic opportunity, the racial and digital divide. The list is long. And often the question we get as district councilors is, what is your power to change that? And I've said, I am done being a glorified advocate. It's really difficult to have an impact on those issues when we do not hold the power to make it happen immediately. And so I think this is an opportunity for our constituents to really look at, if they want an effective city councilor who will advocate, of course, but be able to do a lot more in short order for them, that this is the conversation they want to be a part of, and looking at our powers and expanding them so that we can be more effective as city councilors representing our various districts. So really excited for the conversation, and thank you to all of the panelists and those who have joined us today. Thank you, Councilor Edwards.
Thank you, Counselor Campbell. Counselor Baker. Counselor Baker?
Yeah. Thank you, Madam Chair. I think about this a little differently. I think if we politicize our budget, there's a reason why. The previous speaker just talked about comparing us to other cities. If you compared us to other cities, we are financially far better off than most. AAA bond rating because of good management in our finances. I think if we politicize this budget, you would see a downward spiral in our bond ratings and different things like that. I think we are elected to take votes on this budget. I don't think we need advocates at the table to take votes for us. That's what we are elected as district city councils, as city councils. We're elected to pay attention to this budget. We're elected to have relationships with department heads to make sure that they're doing what we want. So that's about all. I'm here to listen and learn. And again, you cannot take away. If anybody remembers the 70s, the 80s, when the pain that we were going through, I'm sure Councilor Flynn could talk to his father about it. And when we didn't have money, there's a reason why we're in good shape. There's a reason why we're one of the few cities in the country that will be level funded in our pensions. So I would like to see people before the first year First year counselors looking to come in and change the whole budget process. I think they should maybe start to learn some of the departments and what they do first before you want to take all the cards and just throw them up in the air. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Counselor Baker. Counselor Wu?
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I just wanted to say, so much has already been said, so I will just note that I support the chair and her long push and leadership to make sure that we are strengthening the power of democracy and the ability for the democratic representation on the city council, which includes listening to our constituents and providing a voice and amplifying community voices for that to have impact. I also just want to note that for me, it's, and the chair and I have had these conversations before, that it's really important that I would like to make sure the public hears that we can do both, right? It's not just we need to wait for the big change that's going to take a longer time to come before we can exercise more power, before we can continue to strengthen folks' voices and amplify advocacy. There is more that the council could do within our current power structure, which, I totally agree with Councillor Campbell in referencing what the format and power arrangement of other cities are. We are different relative to cities who have more of an ability for the legislative body to exercise immediate authority. However, even compared to cities with the exact same power structure as we have, the council historically has not shaped things in as active a manner as elsewhere in Boston. So there's more that we can do both in the very short term, but also in the long term. So I'm excited that we're having these conversations at once to explore every possible action, every possible tool in our authority. Thank you.
Thank you. Counselor, I'm not sure if we've been joined again by Counselor Flaherty. I know he may have left.
Nope,
If
I'm here,
so,
Madam Chair.
okay, great. Counselor Flaherty.
Very good. Thank you, Councilor Edwards, for filing this important amendment to the Boston City Charter, and look forward to listening to some testimony. Our body should always seek ways to improve public participation in government, as well as increased oversight, and the ability to affect meaningful change would go a long way in making it a better budget and ultimately creating a better city. So I think this hearing is just the first step of many in order to change our city charter. There are a number of things about the charter that we all can talk to. We've addressed over the years as outdated, archaic, and it's time that we start to look at what works best for Boston in 2020, and also moving forward, and also allow us to sort of control our own destiny. And not to digress, but we talk about whether it's the liquor license stuff. It's like we're always having to sort of go hat in hand up to the legislature when we're elected representatives of our communities. We're the legislative branch of city government. We should have the ability, obviously, in partnership, working with the administration, to affect a change, to make things and improve the quality of life and help and support our businesses and institutions more than anybody. And so, and our body will continue to do that. We'll continue to seek ways to improve public participation and also our role in municipal government. So look forward to hearing the testimony and get thoughts of our colleagues, but fully support the efforts that the chair has put forth here. And charter reform is probably one of the more serious actions that this body can take in the upcoming year. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. I did get a text message from President Janey. She might be on, or she might be coming in later. Counselor Janey? She'll be coming in later then. Just to also note that the administration, want to be clear about the back and forth on this and the communication. They're not here today. They, I think, sent a letter, and I'll read from parts of that. I want to be clear, the administration and I are talking on a regular basis about this because it's if this goes on the ballot, we want to make sure that we're clear and ideally on the same page with what goes on the ballot. And I'm going to read briefly from their letter. Dear Chairwoman Edwards, thank you for the invitation to testify. This proposed amendment in the city charter would alter the city's budget process and budgetary function of the Boston City Council. Such a change would impact how departments create their annual budgets and could impact city's bond rating, which influences our ability to borrow money to support the annual capital plan. The city of Boston's financial strength comes from strong management and a demonstrated history of success. Changes to this process require significant discussion and analysis. Members of the administration will be watching today's hearing and listening to counselors and other stakeholders' thoughts on the proposed amendment and the city's budget process. The city's law department is reviewing the proposed amendment and the process as we speak. We look forward to hearing more. The city budget department is working to understand how this proposal would alter the timeline and development of the city's annual budget. As you know, the city's formal budget process begins in mid-April with the filing of the mayor's budget and with the city council, and lasts until the end of June with the final budget vote. The Office of Budget Management is a $3 million department composed of dozens of analysts and staff who work with the department heads and other finance staff across the city government. Thank you again for the invitation to testify, and we look forward to reviewing the hearing. Councilor Janey has joined us, and I'm going to, I think she's, needed to bring her out of the waiting room. Councilor Janey? She should join us shortly. Just to make sure we're
working. Yes, thank you. Can you hear me?
Very well. Yes, Councilor Janey. We were just doing opening statements.
No, I don't have an opening. Thank you
Okay.
so much. I just wanted to make sure I could join. Thank you.
Very well, Councilor Janey. After, I wanted to make sure we were clear also on the timeline. The ultimate timeline that I forgot is that if passed in November of 2021, this would be impacting the budget of 2022. So that's how this process would work. So again, I sent to my colleagues the budget language, the amendment language and suggestions. We also have several guests here today who also wanted to weigh in with suggestions, with concerns, with some historical notes, or even to answer some questions that we may have. Have we been joined by also Pam from Municipal? Yes, we have been joined by Pam. Very well. So I'm going to, unless my colleagues have any specific questions right now, I wanted to go ahead and turn it over to our invited guests and stakeholders so that they can give some feedback and thoughts about the budget amendment. And then I wanted to also answer some of the questions or thoughts from my colleagues that I've gotten outside of this. So first I'd like to turn it over to Armani White from CED, Center for Economic Democracy. Armani.
Thank you for having me, Madam Chair. I'm happy to be here this morning, and I'm happy this discussion is going on. My name is Armani White, and I'm the Director of Campaigns at the Center for Economic Democracy. I'm also a lifelong resident of Boston, so this is a very interesting conversation to be a part of in this moment in time. So the Center for Economic Democracy is super excited to be a part of this discussion and to be here in support of what is being discussed. We support changing the charter of the city of Boston through public referendum to offer an opportunity for residents to inform budgetary decisions through a more democratic process and participatory process. And so we've worked with Councilor Edwards in the past, if folks don't know that, and an ad hoc group of about 25 community organizations and leaders to explore charter reform as an opportunity to understand some of the powers and parameters of the city of Boston's governing charter and identify alternative structures and rules for the city. And in the midst of this global pandemic and this racial justice reckoning, a lot of our issues as a city have been laid bare, and longstanding weaknesses are just very clear. And so this conversation about how communities can have more say and how a $3.65 billion budget is crafted and who money is spent on and is a timely and needed discussion. And so on the heels, right, as Councilor Edwards said, of people of all races filling the streets by the tens of thousands, led by Black youth right here from the city, demanding the defunding of police and investments into communities. This effort is an attempt definitely to answer to those, and so that's important. And we're also sitting in this quiet before the storm in this global pandemic where we're watching unemployment skyrocket, hunger and demand for direct government subsidy just skyrocket. So voters deserve a process that includes public deliberations on where money is spent and services where services should or could be cut. And voters also deserve a method by which their elected officials can actually support the mayor in that process to ensure that needs are met and long-term harm to families is avoided as the experts of their neighborhoods, as Councilor Flynn talked about. And so municipal charter reform has been a topic of interest since our inception at the Center for Economic Democracy. The Center for Economic Democracy, or CED as I'll call it, was founded to serve as a vehicle for advancing strategies that democratize the ways in which we relate socially and financially, with the goal of creating regenerative, community-controlled economies that combat racial inequity and forthcoming ecological disaster. And so, just to let you all know, economic democracy is about people and communities owning and deciding together how to manage our collective needs. From housing to food and energy, and economic democracy asserts that, we have the power to dream and plan and build a more just and sustainable world together for ourselves and for our children, which is what this discussion is about. And then the impetus behind our initial research was about understanding the impetus behind this research was started from the point of understanding that in the greater Boston, 2 out of 5 children of color live in poverty, but we're one of the richest metropolitan regions in the world, right? And according to a 2015 report by the Federal Reserve Bank, right, everyone knows the statistic, the racial wealth gap between white and Black families is $247,000 to $8, right? Which is absurd. And so if you look across all sectors, racial disparities are very clear, and it's something that we can address through this charter reform by being able to better allocate resources. And right now in Boston and Back Bay, residents live 33 years longer. Their life expectancy is 33 years longer than in Roxbury, which is absurd. And so, now more than ever, we just need to be more a part of the process to make sure the city is moving in the right direction. And so, we're working on a number of other issues to curb the influence of corporate privatization, extraction, and the capture of democratic processes by organized money, which compound racial inequity and white supremacy, which under the current model. And right now we're left to kind of contest government decisions issue by issue, campaign by campaign, without a formal channel for actually being able to guide the monetary decisions, which has kind of been talked about here today. And so, we're especially excited about participatory budgeting. That is something that's our thing. Not only because our founder, Aaron Tanaka, helped create the City of Boston's first use participatory budgeting process that exists until this day, and serves as a successful model for one, but because participatory budgeting is clearly valued and seen as a solution to some of the problems we face, because it's being demanded from the streets, and during these protests. And if you look to Minneapolis right now, the site of the most recent Black Lives Matter uprising, and the site of George Floyd's murder, the city and the city council and activists are ongoing a raging debate right now about charter reform as a way to solve some of the issues around police accountability and how communities are or not resourced. So we're taking a national discussion on here in Boston. I think that's very important for us to recognize and to be proud of. And so we're looking forward. I have a couple more. We're looking forward to working with Councilor Edwards on this, but we have a few questions we do want to get answered, and I'll just list them off. It would be good to hear from Councilor and also other experts on this if they have thoughts. But what part and how much of the budget would actually be designated for a participatory budgeting process, and what model of participatory budgeting would you be hoping to implement, and how can community support in that process, including CED, of course? And then how do you imagine us being involved in the design process of that? And then also a couple more. How does this change allow for the council to respond or take into account public feedback in time for meaningful budget changes? Speaking to the somewhat shorter deadline of the process of the budget. And then what would the timeline of the budget process actually look like under this model, including participatory budgeting, and what is the where exactly will the budget originate from? Is it going to come from any city councilor? Does the council president initiate it? So these are some of the answers, some of the questions. And then how does this process actually allow community to lead the process around the budget in a way where we feel empowered, right? Understanding that the current system is not empowering. So these are some of the questions we have. Again, really appreciative of you, Councilor Edwards, for leading on this topic, and for all the councilors here in support and open to discussion. We're excited to be a part of it, and community is excited for this. So happy to be here.
Thank you very much. I'm going to go ahead and just allow for other folks to speak. We're going to try and keep folks within three minutes-ish, 3 to 5 minutes, no more, so we can get as many folks to give these perspectives. I wanted, thank you very much, Armani, though. I think the history was important to know that your organization, we've been meeting, talking, and trying to figure out this question for some time. And I do think it was worth noting a lot of the historical push and movement. And you also, one of the folks at the table was Chuck Turner, right? I forget.
Thank you for uplifting his name. Yeah, Chuck Turner, this was one of his major ideas. So, and I appreciate you forwarding it.
Yeah. So I'm going to turn over to, I don't know if Peter or Justin, if you wanted to bring in some opinions about the question proposed and the process. I think something also that's very important for us is, we hear that other cities have these powers, or that there's certain municipalities that kind of operate differently from us. That I think would be very helpful based on your knowledge and understanding. I think that would be great to kind of understand that as well. And in general, we've heard about the history of how we lost, the city council had this power before. It was taken away in 1909, I believe, to remove that power. But I'll turn it over to either one of you who wants to go first to kind of bring in. I see Justin, you okay, go ahead, Justin.
I'm an associate professor of law and urban planning at MIT and a resident of the city of Boston. And I wanted to start just briefly, I don't want to go through the history, but to highlight this larger question of the city charter and reforming the city charter that I think this proposal begins to raise, because the city charter is obviously the fundamental blueprint of our local democracy, and the Boston City Charter, I would argue, is opaque and outdated, as Councilors Arroyo and Flaherty and others, I believe, suggested. And the charter's opacity discourages the public participation and citizen engagement that's the bedrock of our city and its democracy. And it also makes it difficult for the city council to do, as Councilor Bach and others mentioned, what residents expect the city council to be able to do, because so much power remains with the state. The last formal revisions to the city charter were made almost 30 years ago, and were very modest revisions. So I believe that it's helpful to take this as a starting point to think about broader reforms to make the charter more accessible to the residents of Boston and more clear. A number of cities in Massachusetts have embarked upon charter reform processes to increase citizen engagement and local democracy in the past 5 years, including Fall River and Framingham. And charter reform in New York City has also been ongoing in recent years. The mayor and the city council both created commissions to examine potential revisions, and New Yorkers overwhelmingly voted to pass ballot measures that would strengthen campaign finance reform, approve new civic engagement measures, including a citywide participatory budgeting program, and make changes to the selection process for neighborhood community boards in New York. So the proposal today here seeks a public referendum to increase ways in which the city council and the public can participate in the budgetary process. And I believe that the proposal to give the city council more of a role in budgeting would help make the budgeting process more accessible to residents and increase citizens' engagement. And I appreciate Councilor Baker's concern about responsible financial management of the city and the city's bond rating. And I agree that both of those are of the utmost importance. But I don't believe that giving more power to the city council would necessarily send the city into a financial decline. And I also wanted to just mention about participatory budgeting, that it has been successful in many places where it's been tried as a way to encourage citizen participation and give residents power to shape some portion of the budget. Obviously, Boston, as Armani mentioned, has engaged in participatory budgeting through the Youth Lead the Change effort. And I think expanding that would give avenues for residents to directly shape their city and articulate its priorities. And I recognize the importance of crafting the budget in conversation with the city's department heads, but my understanding of the proposal here is that it seeks to designate some portion of the budget for participatory budgeting, not throw the whole budget into uncertainty. And I believe that increasing participatory budgeting could be done in a way that would improve public engagement and not necessarily jeopardize responsible management of the city's resources or its financial standing. Thank you.
Thank you. Peter?
So thank you very much, Councilor Edwards, both for raising this issue and for inviting me to share a few thoughts about it. And thank you to all the city councilors. I'm really impressed by how many of you are participating in this hearing. This is a really important measure, and it's very reassuring to see how many of you have made yourself available for this hearing, and thank you for your attention. So just a quick word about myself, then a little bit of context that may be helpful in thinking about the proposal, and then one quite narrow specific thing that I just wanted to comment on that I think could use some adjustment in subsequent versions of the proposal. So I am an emeritus professor of law at Northeastern University School of Law. I was there since 1991, and my major area of focus is state and local government. I've been involved in Massachusetts local government in a range of ways. I was general counsel for the Executive Office for Administration and Finance at the State House back in the 1980s, where I dealt a lot with local finance and local structuring and financing for the city of Boston particularly. So it's an issue that it is interesting and important, and I'm happy to be able to be involved in your renewed attention to it. The measure that Councillor Edwards is proposing to change is part of a strong mayor, weak council system that I didn't know much about the specific history of how Boston moved there, but the fact that it was in 1909 is quite characteristic. This was part of a progressive era movement that took place around the country to supplant city councils and legislative bodies and give greater power to the executive. And it reflected a progressive era concern that municipal governments should be run more professionally in a more business-like manner based on sort of scientific understanding of what needed to be done, and that characteristic of progressive era thinking. And I think especially in this particular historical moment, I would be the last person in the world to suggest that we shouldn't rely on science and good knowledge to make careful decisions where we can, but budgets are a funny place to try and think you can do that. There isn't a scientific answer to how much the city should be spending on its schools. There isn't a scientific answer to how much it should be spending on police. There isn't a scientific answer to how much it should be spending on homelessness prevention and other critical services. Those are, and people have often said that a budget is really a reflection of values. And those values are really a reflection of what the popular will is. And it's a place where having a sufficient voice for the legislative body that can be more representative of a wider range of views is really important. And so striking that balance correctly is something that certainly deserves revisiting, and that I think there's good reason to think that the present strong mayor approach may get the balance somewhat wrong. This is not a comment specific to Boston, but more generally, it's a common pattern that executives, mayors, and city managers are more responsive to some of the more establishment views in their municipality, to the business community, to the bureaucracy itself, to well-equipped advocates. And legislatures tend to be more responsive to a wider range of voices in the community and of groups that are relatively marginalized. And again, striking that balance is, I think, exactly what I hope you will all be thinking about as you approach the question of the charter amendment. I've been around long enough that there have certainly been times when I would have been quite uncomfortable trusting the city council to be exercising broad authority over the budget. I guess it's also true that there have been times when I had the same feeling about the mayor. But what has been clear to many of observers of the Boston scene is what an extraordinarily talented and extraordinarily diverse and representative group of people have won seats on the council in recent years. And this seems like a time when it would be really appropriate to think about ways to restrike that balance. So I hope that's a little bit useful as context. The one specific point that I wanted to raise, and it's a relatively minor one, concerns the role of the city council and of the mayor with regard to the Boston Public Schools budget. And as I'm sure you all are very aware, Section 75 of the charter, which concerns the budget for the public schools, specifically says neither the mayor nor the city council shall allocate appropriations among accounts within the school budget or place any restriction on such appropriations. That's the practice throughout the state of Massachusetts, that municipal legislative bodies enact a budget with a single line item for the public schools, and then it is the responsibility of the school committee and the school administration to make all decisions about how to allocate and utilize the amount of money that was provided to the public schools. And I don't think that the intention of the proposed amendment is to alter that, but it does specifically include in the things that it gives to the power of the council is the power to amend the budget for the Boston Public Schools. This would obviously have the effect that it would empower the council not only as you presently can to reduce the budget proposed by the mayor for the schools, but also to increase it. That changes the dynamics in all sorts of important and interesting ways. But I would encourage you to be quite clear that the intention is not to intrude more deeply into the authority that the school committee and the school administration have over what they do with the budget you provide to them. So I mean, I would propose just inserting a few words after where it says amend the budget for the Boston Public Schools in Councilor Edwards' draft, just insert the words consistent with the provisions of Section 75 of this charter, which I think I hope that's consistent with the intent. It certainly would be consistent with the spirit of the municipal school relationship in the city and the relationship that's universal throughout the rest of the Commonwealth. So I'm happy to respond to any questions. And again, I really appreciate the opportunity to address you.
Thank you very much. We have been joined by Councilor Mejia. Councilor Mejia, if you had an opening statement, and then we would also go to Pam from the Municipal Research Bureau.
Yeah, thank you so much, Councilor Edwards. I really don't have what I call an opening statement, just really happy to participate in this conversation. I haven't gone through my first budget season and really realizing that the voices of the people often go unheard. And if we're really serious about being a legislative body and a voice, I think that we definitely need to look towards changing this charter to ensure that the city council is able to fight for and advocate on behalf of those who put us in office. So really looking forward to this conversation. The only thing that I'd like to just add in terms of just communication and language is really making sure that as we move through this process that we're really being super mindful of those who are unable to access the information, and that we don't need a Da Vinci Code to be able to understand what this charter is. I think oftentimes we forget about our own privilege. So I really want to make sure that as we continue to move forward is that we're being super mindful of language that is accessible, not just in translation and interpretation, but that we are speaking in terms that the everyday common folk can understand, so that they're able to participate fully in these conversations moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Pam from the Municipal Research Bureau, are you available?
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning. My name is Pam Coker. I'm the president of the Boston Municipal Research Bureau, and I'm also a city resident. Thank you, Chair Edwards, for the invitation and the rest of the committee as well for the opportunity to speak to Docket 0851 regarding an amendment to the city charter. I feel like we've already heard some great food for thought, including from Peter Enrich and some of the other folks here. I appreciated hearing what was going on the last time the form of government in the city changed so significantly. The Research Bureau's mission is very much focused on sound city finances and policy, so that Boston has the resources to do what it needs to do and wants to do now and in the future for those who live, work, and learn in our city. I'm here to speak in opposition to Docket 0851. Promoting the City of Boston's financial health is a priority of the Research Bureau, and the budget process is an important part of maintaining the city's fiscal stability. The City of Boston for fiscal year 2021 is a $6.61 billion municipal corporation with a budget process that continually develops during the course of a fiscal year, with ample opportunity for the City Council to shape the priorities of the city. A change in the budget process in an attempt to give equal budget authority to the mayor and the council will not be in the best interest of the city as a whole and will bring uncertainty to the city's fiscal future. We oppose Docket 0851 for the following reasons. There are a number of legal issues we are concerned about. This docket utilizes Chapter 43B of the Mass General Laws to create an amendment to the charter. This section of the law is an alternative to establishing a new charter and grants Boston the ability to make minor amendments to its charter and not major revisions. That point is reinforced in the Research Bureau's 2014 City in Transition Report and the Boston Foundation's 2007 Boston Bound report by Frug and Barron. This docket completely changes the budget process, the approval, and the authority of the mayor and the school committee. This is not a minor amendment, but a major revision to the city charter, and we believe would require a different process than the one being pursued under this docket. We anticipate it would require a full home rule petition process. I do note Peter Enrich's comments earlier on the school aspect of this. The proposed amendment, even though drafted to limit the budget, does have a direct impact on the structure of the government, taking powers from the mayor and granting them to the council, including the ability to have increased authority over the school committee. Such authority would be in direct conflict with Mass General Law, Chapter 71, Section 34, which authorizes only the school committee to determine the expenditures within the school committee's total appropriation for the school year. The Research Bureau is also concerned about fiscal uncertainty. Docket 0851 would lead to fiscal uncertainty and instability in Boston that the city cannot afford. The city has an obligation to develop and manage its budget so that annual expenditures stay within available revenues. This order jeopardizes that obligation by granting the city council, among other things, the ability to increase the operating and capital budgets, including the school budget, or originate a new budget at any time and amend the appropriation order in whole or in part without regard to affordability or future impact.
Okay.
Given the authority to the city council to originate a budget at a time of its choosing would cause major disruption and lack of accountability for Boston's finances and disrupt the process that the city council and the mayor currently go through to establish a budget. The rating agencies consistently cite Boston's strong management, conservative fiscal policies, and budgetary performance as reasons for the city's AAA bond ratings, which in turn allows Boston to continue funding a capital plan that addresses the many needs of residents, from housing and parks to public buildings and infrastructure at a sustainable cost. The city's record of successful financial management going back decades, as evidenced by consecutive surpluses, high bond ratings, and easy access to borrowing funds, even in difficult times, was made possible through the current model of budgetary authority. That also provides for a checks and balances procedure that is important to the stability of the city. Dividing budgetary responsibility among council and mayor injects risk in this process and threatens the city's financial stability and the city's ability as well to fund capital projects. Boston needs to continue with a strong financial management structure to maintain its fiscal health, to continue to deliver basic services and be prepared and flexible to deal with the changing needs of residents, as well deal with unexpected needs in downturns in the economy or a pandemic, such as the one we're experiencing now. A change in the charter now may be especially ill-advised during the fiscal and community uncertainty in the current pandemic. Boston's operating and capital budgets are being developed long before the April beginning of this official engagement with the City Council for the budget process. The city's budget process as it is now is complex. It involves hundreds of employees, financial experts, and teams in administration and finance, budget management, auditing, assessing, treasurer, Boston Planning and Development Agency, the Retirement Board, law, intergovernment relations, and in every department, board, committee, and commission to develop appropriate revenue estimates and determine the amount of non-discretionary expense that will be required to create guidelines for developing individual departmental budgets. The city council structure and central staff is not prepared to execute this type of analysis and evaluation or forecast. Such a shift as this docket proposes would, in terms of fiscal responsibility, require the council to stand up all of those same experts in its own right, in order to also have the expertise and ability to appropriately forecast and program funding for each year. We do recommend that this docket as presented be rejected. The city should exercise its current powers and responsibilities to impact the city's budget and priorities and ensure that that process is participatory. Boston's operating and capital budgets are living documents that change and are updated constantly throughout the fiscal year. The City Council has many opportunities to impact the policy goals and direction of the city, as well as establish a more inclusive or participatory process with the public. For example, an interactive and responsive budgetary process. To improve public engagement, the city could set up hearings, or the City Council could set up hearings before the budget season begins, inviting members of our public to provide input on where they would like to see more city appropriations and considerations, and tailoring the budget to city's residents' needs. This advance effort before the formal budget process starts that would engage city councilors and the community could better inform both the councilors' understanding of how to guide budget discussions with the mayor and inform the mayor as well about the community's needs. I am particularly interested in the proposal around participatory budgeting, which I understand will get a hearing in September. That can also be another way to increase engagement among the community in the actual budget process. Last thing about this I just want to refer to is in the final approval of the city budget, there are a number of things that the City Council could have an impact on certain decisions that we haven't necessarily seen, including on housing issues. For example, when was the last time funding from the Housing Trust made it through the City Council as it's supposed to? And we've seen with the shift for the fiscal year 21 budget as the mayor took $12 million out of overtime in Boston Police Department and distributed it to other departments and programs, which I believe was strongly supported or called for by a number of city councilors. That was an example of not having official budgetary authority, but for the city councilors to still have authority as councilors, as key leaders in our city, to help get resources redirected where they need it to go. And clearly that was quite a success for those councilors without having the actual budget authority. So perhaps we'll see more of that.
All right.
Thank you for your time this morning.
Thank you so much, ma'am. I appreciate that. At this time, I've gotten some questions from text from people. I've gotten some folks who have to go, but I do think unless there's someone from the public who wants to testify, I wanted to go ahead and answer some of the questions from my colleagues, also engage in I think, a robust conversation about the specific amendment. And I wanted to also address some of the points made by the Municipal Research Bureau specifically. So just to answer some of the questions from first, Armani White had some things about specifically what would the participatory budgeting process look like. And I think that that's also what our working session should be dedicated to. But right now, I think it's not sufficient that at the whim or will or donative or charitable heart of any mayor that we might have participatory budgeting or not. So the fact that I think it's great that Aaron Tanaka set it up, but let's be clear, if it's not put in the budget, it doesn't happen. That's different than what a charter amendment would do, which was require that it happens. And so what could that look like? We can either set a certain sum or a percentage of the budget that we think is deemed like half a percentage of each budget. You could set, I'm going to put you on mute, Pam, real quick. Thank you. And we can either do that. This is a general response to everyone. You can set a percentage aside, and then that is put on as part of the fiscal election that happens every other year, for example, to say where that money goes. You can, rather than spend additional funds for a specific election or specific vote every year, it might make more sense to say a certain percentage of the average of the two budgets will be then voted on in the next municipal election. That way we're constantly having a real turnout. We're not increasing the amount of money in our elections department, but we've set a certain budget aside. We can look at several cities to see how the specific question or what is put on the ballot for the participatory part. Does it go to youth? Does it go to housing? Does it go to general operating? We could be as big as we want. I think a great example of participatory participation, if you will, that we put to the people of Boston was our CPA, right? Of which the Boston Municipal Bureau opposed that as well, having the question go to the public to see how we would raise money and then also where it would go. But the city did this with guidelines saying it can only go to historic preservation, to housing, right? And to open space. So there's a way in which we can construct the major buckets that it goes to, and that the election that it gets on, and the percentage. And I don't want to do that by myself. I think that's part of the reason why we have this open, but that's how I was thinking about it. I do agree that if we're going to have anything on the ballot, it needs to be clarified about that. Specifically about how people can be involved. I know several of my colleagues already do meet with people well in advance of the budget. That's not at issue, honestly, about people being able to talk with their city councilors. It's about councilors being able to respond to what they say directly in the budget. And that we don't have that power. I want to be clear, when folks say they oppose the amendment versus there's two things really being proposed today or at issue today. Should the voters have a decision? And what is the question that they would decide? So I'm not sure. So I told people many people say, yes, I want to have a voice about how you shouldn't have one, which is fine, but that would be in November 2021. So I would encourage my colleagues to be brave and to trust in the electorate of Boston. That's what we're doing. We are not making the decision today about any powers that we have, nor could we. I am asking folks.
Madam Chair, you muted.
I'm asking folks, can you hear me? I'm asking folks, my colleagues, to say a specific question about the budgetary powers should be given to our constituents. Now, we are also constructing that question. And there are many things, and I do appreciate, Peter, you bringing up the fact that the question as posed conflicts with state law, and I think Pam brought that up as well. It conflicts with state law and conflicts with other parts of the charter when it comes to the school budget. And that might be the reason why we have to change this question, and that part can't be part of it. Wanted to also address the question of timing. And I think this is something, a matter of scrivener's error. I think the Boston Municipal Bureau brought up that at any time the city council would be able to propose a budget. It does say that, but that is not the goal, that any time in the middle of the year, we can just come out with a budget. The point, what is very clear in this, is that the city council can start, can look at, can propose something, but no matter what, the mayor is going to be the one, or by the second Wednesday of April, there will be a budget proposed. So whether I talk about whatever I do, by the second Wednesday of April, there will be a budget proposed, right? And then by the second Wednesday in June, the city council must act on that proposed budget. And we have under this certain powers to either amend, to reduce, to whatever. After that, 7 days after that, the mayor can make an action, approve, return, or do something with that budget. He can also veto it. If he vetoes it, the city council by 2/3 could override his veto. I actually think this is the first time we're demanding that a budget happen, no matter what. And what we had this year and what we currently have is that a budget could not happen. We could go straight to the 1/12 provision that was on the table. And you want to talk about closed door, with no transparency, with lack of fiscal responsibility. Wait till we're going back and forth on a month-to-month basis, because that is currently what's allowed. So let's be clear, the back and forth between the mayor and the city council is allowed. It's not controlled, nor is there a deadline for the 1/12 budget, and nor is there any for the collateral damage that could happen in there. That is what we have right now. This does not allow that to happen. There's no way a proposed budget and discussion can't begin and end under this charter amendment. And I think that's actually more fiscally responsive. The other thing is, we have approved in many cases what the Municipal Bureau and other fiscal watchdogs have said has been gluttonous budgets. Our ability to be fiscal stewards is also part of this budget amendment. To say it's too much, to say whatever. And I want people to understand that this is not so much we want to take away from the mayor. It's just we want a seat at the table. And as Peter and Rich noted, we actually are more reflective on the ground and dealing with many different interests than the mayor, any mayor can be, the legislative party. And I think in robust democracies, the legislative branch does control the purse. Now, this is not a control move, but it's certainly putting us at the table. I also wanted to address the fact that while my colleagues and I have certainly been part of the Boston miracle, if you will, and we have seen consistent, wonderful budgets and fiscal success. What Armani mentioned, what we have seen consistently is that success is not equally shared by majority of Bostonians, and nothing from the Boston Municipal Bureau thus far has ever addressed that amount of wealth inequality. This allows for city councilors to hear directly about what their constituents are dealing with. And that is something I think the status quo is not working. And I'll say that over again, the status quo is not working for a majority of people who live and try to live and struggle to live in Boston. The way we are allocating funds is not working. Yes, we have a robust budget. Yes, we have a good economy. And yes, I cannot deny that it's probably far better than what we've had before. But let's be clear, for a lot of Bostonians, that reality is not true. There is no fiscal success for them. We are in a displacement and housing crisis. And as for the neighborhood housing trust that I sit on, we've been allocating millions of dollars from the linkage fees that we actually finally agreed on to hopefully increase if the state house will allow us to do that. So all of these things, I still think lead back to, one, should the voters have a voice about how their money is allocated? And I think yes. And even if that voice is no, we don't think this question or this city council is the right way to do it, I still think we're a better democracy for at least asking them to be at the table. What home rule petitions don't do, home rule petitions go straight to the state house and ask people from Situate, ask representatives from Brockton, ask representatives from Springfield what they think we should do. I'm tired of doing that. That is why I wanted this to go directly to the people of Boston in this ballot initiative. So I think I've addressed most of the concerns expressed. And again, I want to be clear, I am in talks with the administration because I do think there might be some things that they are okay with or fine with the electorate saying, or at least giving the electorate a decision. And I think that's really what the goal of this conversation is too. Is there anything or any power, I guess, from the either Municipal Research Bureau or other organizations, if you are, or other counselors who are skeptical of this, is there anything that you think that we should consider that should be put on the ballot for voters to have a power or decision about? I think I'm leaning towards democracy. This question is it just a draft right now? It's not going to be the final thing, but I do think it's worth us asking the voters what they think. I don't know if anyone has any questions or response. Counselor Bach.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to follow on your comments to say, I appreciate the Research Bureau's concerns, but I think to your point that there are ways of meeting some of them, right, and still putting a question on the ballot. And I think both Pam and also Councillor Wu made the point that change shouldn't wait on a charter amendment. And I think, as I referenced at the start, we've got a hearing order we're going to consider in the fall about participatory budgeting. Councillor Mejia and Braden are co-sponsors with me of that, and also one about zero-based budgeting, and just sort of in general trying to open up the process. And Councillors Arroyo and Mejia are sponsors with me on that. And I do think that, to Pam's point, there is an opportunity for us to have a public process that comes before the sort of regular budget process and make space for those voices. But I think that on the point of democratic accountability, that it's really different to say to members of the public, you can come speak and we'll listen, and say to members of the public, you can come speak and there will be an actual mechanism for what you say and how you weigh in to actually affect the process. And you can understand that and you can feel like, oh, this is actually going to be an effective use of my time. And I do think the onus is on us to provide a clearer pathway there. And I think that it's the same for counselors. I think Pam referenced the fact that, of course, counselors can have conversations with the mayor and change the shape of the final budget. But I think, again, that there's not enough real procedural leverage there. And so you're going to see very variable outcomes on that front. And to me, in terms of the point about predictability and the bond rating, I would just say, I think that there are numerous different city charters around the state, around the country, that still achieve the kind of predictability that you need for the bond rating and for the sort of fiscal health of the city, while offering a more participatory model. So I'm sympathetic to the idea that we might want to think about scheduling as we think about, refining this proposal. So, whether that's that there is some place where the participatory process comes in earlier, whether it's asking that the mayor's departmental be what come first, but come earlier, and there be a more formal period in which the council's responding. I think we see, obviously, at the state level, a budget process that takes for granted that there's going to be real legislative amendment and change. And I would just say, it was frustrating to me in the month of June to find myself reading articles about town councils across Massachusetts, where various selectmen were trying to figure out how to change their budget in response to COVID, and the fact that in lots of towns and cities across the state, under the rules that the state has for its municipalities, we've got a lot of legislatures with much more budget authority than we have. And I point to that to say, I don't think this is impossible. I think that obviously the balanced budget requirements on the city would hold regardless of how we redistributed the council and mayoral power. And I think there is a judicious way to do this that brings more voices into our budgeting process and still achieves enough predictability and fiscal responsibility to be something that I hope that the Research Bureau could come not to oppose. So I look forward to this continuing conversation, and I appreciate those concerns, but I think there's a way of achieving them and achieving some of the broader goals that others have discussed today. So thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. And no, I just want to be clear. The reason why we invited the Boston Municipal Research Bureau is to provide the opinion that they did. And I want to be clear that that's a good thing. And I believe that they represent a lot of people as well in terms of those particular concerns and looking at it. So I want to be clear. Thank you, Pam, for coming. If you felt anything else, apologize if you did. Councillor Campbell.
Thank you, Councillor Edwards. And again, thank you to the panelists for their presentations. I have to acknowledge Justin and that beautiful baby as someone who has a soon to be 8-month-old. So thank you for bringing the beautiful baby as well. And so I just want to echo a couple of comments. And I think Councillor Edwards, you said it best, that we are at the tables before the budget process in our districts, sometimes outside of our districts, really listening to our constituents to understand what they want us to be advocating for, what resources they need, what they desire. And in my district, which is largely, of course, Mattapan and Dorchester, the conversations are always about the inequities that exist in this district with respect to education, parks, open space, business districts. The list is long, every inequity you can think about. And people are pushing for more and more resources through informal conversations we set up prior to the budget, conversations we set up via during the budget process, of course, in creative ways. And then we're going in to negotiate, of course, with the administration. And I think if this system were working well, this city as it is prospering, everyone would feel that prosperity. And we know that there are certain neighborhoods in the city that do not, even after they are advocating and participating as fully as they can. And so I just wanted to push back on the comment or suggestion that we need to do that. We are doing that. And I think, if anything, people don't necessarily see that, but it's a large part of our job. And I don't know about others, especially, maybe Justin will understand this, as someone, as a mother, a wife, 2 kids, I don't have time to waste. And it is really frustrating year after year to have folks asking for the same thing, and it's be challenging to deliver on that. And I know that the system in which we currently have, where the power is not balanced, it will always be difficult to deliver on not the desires, the needs that people have in certain communities in the city of Boston. And this is just one way. I mean, many of us are very creative. We look outside the city budget for resources to make sure that we can meet our district residents' needs. But this process itself does not deliver the equity that we say we all want to deliver on. And I think there's a real problem, and everyone should be disturbed, or at least it should raise red flags, where you have to go in behind closed doors to negotiate, and that is not public, where it feels transactional, where it's relational. If we truly want to get at equity, then we have to reevaluate our processes where it's not relational in order to get the very things the community may need. And so I think there's a way in which to do it where folks are educated about our budget process, can hear from us about the limitations in our budget and how we can design a system that works for everyone. And of course, do it in partnership with the mayor and the administration, and understanding that the mayor, by virtue of his role and responsibilities, obviously has greater considerations than maybe district councilors have at any given time. But there's a way in which I think to create a process where it's not relational, where it's more transparent, where it allows for greater accountability and participation. And that's what gets at equity. Otherwise, we will never get at equity because it will be about who you know, who you're connected with. And we try to make that work as best we can within the existing system. But I think we all need to be mindful that if we continue down this pathway, and other cities just offer examples, it's not necessarily what we should adopt entirely here, but if we continue down this pathway that we're going, we will be talking about the same inequities in the same neighborhoods for years to come, regardless of the advocacy of the counselor who serves. And I think all of us serve our districts extremely well. We have hard jobs. And so I hope to take this conversation on the road, to continue to participate. We've already received feedback where folks are like, I don't know about this, and to make it as open as possible, where it's not just those who call themselves advocates participating, but the lay citizen, lay person, getting a glimpse of what happens inside and how they can work with us to transform the system accordingly. So I just wanted to offer those comments and continue the conversation on the details with respect to what's proposed.
Thank you very much, Councillor Campbell. Councillor Arroyo, then Councillor Mejia.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I'm just going to echo, I think it's really important that as we talk about this, we talk about it in the context of where we are today, what we know today. And I think one of the things that I keep in mind every day is that we exist right now in a time where our mayor has joined me in my call in declaring racism a public health crisis. And I think it's important to understand that when he did that, what he decided to do was shift money in the budget. And the reason he did that, I assume, is because he understands that when we talk about systemic racism, when we talk about institutional racism, this is what we're talking about. The system that we're talking about reforming today, the ability to dictate who and where and how taxpayer dollars get dispersed and how budgets work. And so when we talk about our communities in the city of Boston, they all haven't been funded equally. They all haven't been treated equally. They all haven't been engaged equally. They all haven't had a seat at the table equally. And I know this, I can't speak with any kind of, we haven't done it yet. And I wasn't alive when this happened in the early 1900s. And so I can't speak to whether or not, the city council process would be perfect if it changed to a budget process that the city council had sway over. But what I can speak to is that this budget process has created those inequities. This budget process has created that crisis. And so when we talk about, the status quo and whether or not it's worth protecting, in my opinion, it's not. And so the question becomes, what's the best way to craft this that brings it to the people, that makes it truly participatory, that invites engagement? And this is really important on the engagement part. I've had these conversations. I've seen these conversations. I'm the third person in my family on this council, so it's not like I'm new to being around budget conversations. The reality is, it's very difficult to be engaged when your counselor who you are trying to speak to can't create a line item, can't actually decrease or increase any individual line item, can't actually create the budget. It doesn't invite participation. It doesn't invite buy-in. It doesn't invite engagement. What it invites is a checking out, frankly, of the system. And so when we talk about, just how this would work and how this has to be done, I think that's an important question. But I think it's also an important question to ask, understanding the context that our system as it works now doesn't work for everyone. I would say it doesn't even work for most. And so that's a real, that is the situation we're in now. And so I'll leave it there because I'm interested in hearing from other folks. But I think it's just really important to ground this in the fact that what we have now doesn't work for everybody, certainly doesn't work best for everybody, and really does need to be looked at in that context, that racism is a public health crisis, that institutional racism causes inequity, and that this budget and our budget is a statement of our values and how we plan to move this city forward every year. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councilor Arroyo. Councilor,
Yes, I'm having a little bit of technical difficulties. Can you just confirm you can hear me and see me? Great, thank you. I also have to just quickly push back. I think it was on Pam with the Research Bureau in terms of whether or not this is something that we should be pursuing at this moment in time. I think if any moment in time for us to pursue it, it is now. As a freshman counselor, nothing was more evident to me, the lack of power that we have during the budget season when we were presented with something that we had to act to, where we were not engaged in the process to determine these funds to be allocated to. So the way it's right now, it's more of a reaction. And Tom Campbell said it best. So disheartened by the tango dancing that happened between April and June, and the question of
Councilor Mejia, you're breaking
Yes.
up. You're breaking up, so I don't know if you're in a. Ooh. Councilor Mejia. Okay. Does anyone else see her? I don't see her. Oh, there you
Can
go.
you hear me now?
I can hear you now. Yes, Councilor
Yes,
Mejia.
Be heard and seen at this point. So I'm just pushing. I don't know what part of my you heard before, but just two things. One is that having gone through the budget season once,
sorry, Councilor Mejia.
Okay, that's okay. I just have a bad connection.
So I wanted to, oh, I think we lost her altogether. And feel free to raise your hands if you have any questions, thoughts, or suggestions. I see you, Councilor Baker.
I have a question for Justin. Justin, you mentioned that other cities are doing participatory budgets. What cities are you talking? What cities do you think we should be following?
Thank you for the question, Councilor Baker. I would want to do further research, and I'd be happy to do that to give you the best examples. But New York includes some participatory budgeting. It started in Porto Alegre in Brazil. It's very common in different parts of Europe. I think it's important that there be, it be structured in a way that maintains the integrity of the city's budget. But I do think that many of the examples where it has been practiced in New York and Porto Alegre and other places have found that it is a way of increasing engagement, getting a direct sense of residents' priorities without undermining the functioning of the crucial functioning of city departments. And I'd be happy to do some more research and give you some examples.
Yeah, well, maybe you should do the research, because you throw it out there and it doesn't really, you're not compelling me to think that we should follow any other cities to do that. And Peter, you sounded like you walked a little bit of a fence there. You were on board in 1909 when they changed to the strong mayor system, but now you like the makeup of this council, so you want this council to have more power, and you're probably not a supporter of this mayor. So what happens when you don't like the makeup of the council and you do like the mayor? Would you want to switch it back that way?
Again, thank you for the question, but no, that is not what I intended to be saying. I was trying to cast
What it sounded like.
I was trying to cast a little light on the historical context of the transitions that a number of cities made back around the turn of the last century. And it did reflect some flaws in the governance systems then. It didn't capture anywhere near all the flaws in governance systems that were dominant then. I think there were some very serious mistakes made by the progressives. And one of the mistakes was this notion that by centralizing authority in the executive, you could have a more orderly management of governance, and that was an improvement. I think that was a mistake in 1909 as much as it's a mistake today. That what's important in governmental processes, and especially in governmental budgeting processes, is to find an appropriate balance between letting the voices of the people who elect all of you have their input into the process, having some central management to ensure that some of the concerns that the Municipal Research Bureau has stood up for so effectively for so many years are reflected, but finding the right balance between executive and legislative roles that do play very different parts. I did not mean any criticism of the current mayor, who I think in many ways has been admirable. I do think that the inevitable nature of being in the mayor's office is the voices you tend to hear most prominently do shift, and may shift from who you heard most prominently before you became mayor. That's an institutional factor. That's not a factor about, and it's not a criticism of any particular mayor. It's a reflection of, I think, some realities of how governance processes work that are worth your thinking seriously about as you consider charter changes. Does that clarify?
Not really. Never mind, I'll move on. Justin, so when you're doing your research, will you look at American cities, and I want their bond ratings next to them, where they are, participatory American cities that are comparable to Boston, and where they are in their pension solvency and things like that.
I'd be happy to do that.
And you can get that over the chair, and I'll work with the chair. Again, people are downplaying relationships like relationships are bad things. We, as elected officials in the city of Boston, it's incumbent on us to form relationships with department heads, with people in the departments, so you know what the departments need. I think we're downplaying the importance of relationships in the city, within the city, the departments. Know what the departments are doing. Thank you.
I'd be happy to do that. And I'd also just add, I think it could be worth it.
Justin, I'm not asking you to form relationships.
Oh, no.
I think we understand. I think we understand. If I may, Councillor Mejia would like to also have a comment. I don't mean to cut you off, Justin, but I do want to try and make sure we stay within the 2-hour frame, if that's okay.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Baker. Councillor Mejia. Councillor Mejia? I see your hand is raised.
Can I make one more point, Madam Chair?
Yes, go ahead.
Quick point. Big concern of mine, one of the councils talked about not regular people involved in this budget. It's not going to be regular people. It's going to be, again, paid advocates making the loudest noise. People that are paid there, paid advocates. They're not the citizens of Boston. They're not worried about their household. They're worried about their vision and their issues. Advocates.
Thank you very much, Councillor Baker. Councillor Mejia, then Councillor Sabi George also raised her hand.
Yes, just really quick. Thank you. Sorry for the technical difficulties, but just wanted to talk a little bit about my journey on the budget season this past cycle. And, I understand the importance of building relationships, but as someone who only won by 1 vote, I know that those relationships for me inside that hall were very difficult to come by. And so not everybody is willing to open up their offices and sit and talk with you. So
if you called someone, they would meet with you. If you
called
someone, they would meet with you.
Councillor Baker, please, again, trying to get within the
So the point is that, we have to be really mindful at this point in time in terms of who puts you in office and who you're there to represent and speak on behalf of. And with this type of amendment in front of us, and this opportunity really is about opening it up to allow those who are most impacted to help inform the conversation. So it's not just about the insiders, right? That we're creating space for those who have not been engaged in the process to really sit and collaborate on how and what we should be spending our money on. I think that that is what I'm hoping for. Whether I have a relationship with a particular department or not should not determine whether or not we should have X amount of dollars for specific city services. And I think that it's that type of politicking that is happening that is making it harder for us to ensure that we're pouring in resources to neighborhoods that have been traditionally unheard and disengaged in the process. So I just really want to be super mindful that right now, the way we play politics, we're playing with people's lives every single day. And I think that if this is the moment for us to really change, this is not the 70s anymore, okay? I think that and also having to go ask permission to your dad to see how you're gonna be able to spend your money, or going to the state house for the home rule position, all of this needs to change. If we're city councilors, then we need to be able to have the power to represent those who put us in office. And we need to be able to do this in a way that everybody feels like they have a real voice at the table, period.
Thank you. Councillor Sabi George.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to my colleagues for sharing their thoughts and concerns. Certainly their concerns, because as we work towards this, we have to be very careful about what we're designing, because we have recognized and I think realize, regardless of where we fit on this charter amendment, that the system is broken and that there are breaks in the system that we have to repair, and we don't want to cause more harm. We want to repair those breaks and redesign a much better system. And we talk a lot about systems and access to systems and systems that work and function for the residents in our constituencies across the city of Boston. So I have appreciated sort of the back and forth, and I find it very informative. I am curious if we have any sort of general, more typical traditional public testimony before us this afternoon, or still this morning prior to the end of that 2 hours. But that's my question. Again, I do appreciate everyone and their sort of thoughtfulness on this topic.
Thank you. I don't think we have any traditional public testimony. For those, just to let people know in terms of the next step, well, we're going to make sure the working session or sessions about this are in the evening time to allow for more folks to come during and after work. But so I acknowledge that. That's probably what has impacted some of the initial public participation. And I acknowledge, Councillor Mejia, your thoughts that sometimes it's so wonky or so not clear about what's going on that some folks don't participate, or they're waiting to see what the end result is. So I can course correct on both of those things. I'm acknowledging that. Councillor Bach.
Madam Chair, if you'll forgive me the indulgence, I just wanted to shout out to, we've had watching in the waiting room as attendees throughout this hearing are folks who are part of the Success Link Youth Jobs Program who are working with us this summer. So they're not here to provide any testimony, but they have been following along, and I know are really interested in the topic. So just wanted to shout out to that whole team.
Thank you. And I want to be very clear, we can agree that voters should have a voice and then completely disagree or vote against this. So the back and forth, and I'm not just from my colleagues, but also in the public, they're like, I'm against this, I don't want this, and so on and so forth. That's perfectly fine. And it's also an option to say so on the ballot. I mean, it could very well lose if this doesn't work out. I want to be clear about that. So, and I think one of the things I want to also demonstrate is we can agree, disagree, and be cordial towards each other in a respectful manner while we disagree and have our reasons. And that's also, I thought this was also a very organized way to do that as well. That doesn't just allow us to vote on something and send it up to the State House or just vote on something one time. This is going to require people to do the work. It's going to take not only forming the question, but almost a year of that question being, if approved by the Attorney General, it's going to take a year of people having conversations about this in order for folks to agree or disagree with it ultimately in November. So there's several shots, not just for opponents, but even proponents, to have robust conversations. This is not an all or nothing moment at all. In terms of the formation of the ballot, I just wanted to summarize some of the, I think, great suggestions and concerns about what we need to be doing in order for my colleagues or for anyone in the public to think that there's a question that can go. One, I do want to acknowledge how creative my colleagues and myself have been with leveraging and getting funding in our districts. For those of us like myself and perhaps Councillor Flynn and perhaps Councillor Bach, who have development and large real estate deals going on, I'm in a position to negotiate directly with those developers for my district, right? But not all districts have the same kind of economic prosperity at the same time. So again, my creativity may not work in other places where some of my colleagues are relying on nonprofits, relying on corporate charity and all of these different things. So we are trying our best. And I think that in no way, shape, or form is Pam saying we're not. But I just wanted to note that we are trying our best at being creative to help leverage and to talk with the mayor and talk with department heads as well. That is, I agree with Councilor Baker. That is exactly what we are elected to do. None of this would take that away. None of this would take away the wonderful work of the Youth Connect. None of this takes away all of the things that we're doing to try and bring as many people into the city council and process. This is not an either or. This is an addition to. So that's one thing. I want to also say that I agree that the budget reflects our values. And I don't believe anybody on the city council or anybody speaking today thinks that the amount of wealth and equity, the fact that we are a city that is becoming a city that is squeezing out our middle class, that we are a city that is becoming increasingly hard to start in or end in as a family, as a working person, that is at all reflective of our personal values. And if our budget doesn't correct that, then I think we have a problem. And I think we need to change the budget to reflect those values, that we want a middle class, that we want workers to be able to stay here, that we want people to start their life and be able to end their life in the city that they love and be able to afford to do so. And I don't believe the budget is doing that. And I do think more in terms of help, in terms of perspective, in terms of being able to sit and go back and forth with the mayor is a good thing. And right now it's mayor offers X, see what you like, see what you can get, and then up or down. And if it's down, never forget, if it's down, we're going to end up in a back and forth that is probably more contentious than this. Finally, in terms of the actual budget language, I will absolutely, I think it's worth putting on the table or really questioning if the public schools area and that language it conflicts too much, right, with either the state statute or with the other parts of the charter. So either we're going to change the other parts of the charter and send up a home rule petition, which I believe you would have to do for the state statute, or this might not be an appropriate vehicle to look at that. That's one thing. I do want to note, though, that the state school committee, while the school committees have that power, we're the only school committee that we don't get to elect. So, hey, that would have been some direct, they elect the school committee people who then deal with the budget. We don't get to do that. So if anything, it's maintaining the same power structure. The mayor appoints the school budget committee people, and they come out with a budget that we can't touch. So just want to note the irony about that. I do think we need to view a budget question with the eyes of a fiscal steward. And so assuming that a question should be on the ballot, so if we can get over the hump that it should go to the people, what does a fiscally responsible question look like? I think it means certain safeguards. I think it means certain enumerated timelines. I think it means making clear we can't go into debt, making clear that we also have to produce or don't put up or shut up in terms of the budget so that we're not drawing out anything. And I think it honestly could set some limits on how much money we can appropriate. Let's say no more than X percentage can be maneuvered by the city council or not. This is my very woeful, humble attempt at trying to be a fiscal conservative. That's all I got. Anyway, but those are safeguards that can be put in that limit the powers within the question, but still allow for certain powers to go to the city council. I absolutely think we need to expand and look at participatory budgeting. I believe our neighbor Cambridge is an example of a city that has it. They set aside a certain amount of money and they straight vote on it, I think even online, for where certain funds, but they cap how much those funds are, and they make that clear what's available and how to vote, to vote for. So I think we can look at that model, maybe streamline it. There's also the opportunity to, you don't have to go so big. You could start small and it can grow or not grow. And also with the mindset of a fiscal stewardship, it could also be dependent on certain fiscal successes or certain budgetary benchmarks that we have, provided that we can pay for all of our operating experience operations and there are no layoffs, provided that we can pay for I don't know, our schools, fully fund ours, provided the following things, we shall put X percentage of the budget up for grabs. This is, again, just suggestions I'm putting out there for the working session. And then I'd love to hear, of course, your thoughts from the Municipal Bureau. I see you, Councilor Braden, you raised your hand, but also thoughts from CED about how to make sure that we're constructing the right kind of participatory budget that does, as Peter said, balances those interests that we have to be effective and to also increase participation. Those are two interests. They do not need to be in conflict. Finally, I'm actually hearing a lot of, I think, very good feedback about originating the budget in that particular power. And when I learned from the administration, there's 25 full-time people dedicated to that. And what kind of, is it fiscally responsible if we were to do that? We might have to hire staff in the city council. So for the money that we would be spending, does that count to the amount of money that we would be working or trying to allocate if we're generating our own budget? That's a good question, and I look forward to hearing from my colleagues about that, if that's something that they're interested in at all. So those are my thoughts about where the changes and edits should start. I'm going to turn this over to Councilor Braden.
Thank you. I think that point about the administration having 25 full-time staff dedicated to developing the budget, and that doesn't preclude a more collaborative process in developing a budget together with the city council. So it doesn't necessarily mean we have to duplicate staff. We could maybe have some staff, but it doesn't rule out a collaborative process. The one thing I'm unclear about is how this change in the city charter will affect our this experience we have of when we have a home rule petition that we have to go with our cap in hand to the State House and ask for approval for things that impact the fiscal our ability to raise revenue or whatever in the city. Will this change in this charter change that or make a change in that situation?
If I may, Peter and Justin, I believe that we're actually precluded from, through a charter amendment in this particular process, of changing the structure of our government, of raising revenue, of doing term limits. Those things are actually specifically reserved for the home rule process, which again, we could argue all day about why that is wrong, but those are specifically reserved in the home rule amendment and in section 10 for the State House. This does not change that. Our ability to raise revenue, the last time we were able to do that or change how we raise revenue was under the CPA process, and that was only allowed through a state statute local option that we opted into. So the power was given by the state for municipalities to do that. And I think when it comes to when it comes to revenue, it will still be from the State House, likely giving local options to municipalities. Justin, Peter, Pam.
True.
Right? Okay. So this does not change that.
Thank you.
We have about 2 minutes. And I wanted to see if anyone had any conclusionary remarks. Again, I believe this is the beginning of a conversation, so I think drawing lines in the sand is premature. We're still drawing up what the question is going to be. But I do think, I do appreciate everyone for participating and being part of this. And so unless, does any of my colleagues, Armani?
Yeah, I can just share,
Okay.
quickly. I know that we finished pretty soon, but at CED, this is something that we're super excited about. We're going to work with, Justin Steele and Peter to think through how to answer the questions that Councilor Baker proposed. But there are examples of how this works. There are ways to do this and to do it in a way that ensure that community first like feels bought in and a part of the process, but also that it solves for the issue at hand, which is like lack of community feeling a part of the process. So and also just redistributing resources appropriately and making sure that everyone has an opportunity to help make that happen. So sorry, I just had a little reminder pop up. Don't know if my screen went away. Yeah, but yeah, so we're excited to help with it. There's organizations that are thinking about this, like Families for Justice Healing. There's organizations that have been a part of this discussion, like the Chinese Progressive Association, organizations that are very connected to people who are going to be, the ones that we're answering to, the constituents. So we're excited for this conversation. And again, just happy that we are able to discuss it and get clarity, and looking forward to more working sessions and looking forward to just expanding democracy here in the city of Boston. Let's be leaders, just because maybe we don't have as many examples of this happening doesn't mean we can't lead the way. So let's do it.
Thank you. Pam, did you have any conclusory remarks? Peter, Justin? And then I'll turn it over to my colleagues if they have anything. Go ahead.
Just say that I also am happy to be helpful as the process goes forward, however I can, and thank you all for your interest.
Now, on behalf of the Research Bureau, I really appreciate the opportunity to be part of this conversation today. It's great to have the back and forth and the engagement, and I really look forward to more of that in working sessions going forward. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for including me as well.
Thank you. And to my colleagues, those who are still available, Councillor Bach.
Just thank you again, Madam Chair, and say I definitely will hope to continue to be actively involved in the sort of drafting and redrafting, and I really think that there is a way here for us to have a charter amendment that mirrors more closely the really justified expectations and aspirations of the citizens of Boston around their ability to really impact the city budget process. And I don't think that needs to be an enemy of fiscal responsibility and prudence. And I think this is an important moment for us to get that offering right. And then, as Councillor Edwards has repeatedly emphasized, put it before the voters. So I'm definitely looking to continue to be really actively involved in that, and thank the chair.
Thank you. Councillor Arroyo.
Thank you so much for just everybody who participated in this hearing. I think it's a good first step. I appreciate this just in terms of how we reimagine the city. And so thank you everybody for that.
Thank you. Councillor Braden, I know you just spoke, but I don't know if you had anything else you wanted to add. Oh, Councillor Braden may have stepped away. Sorry to spot you. Well, I will just simply say thank you all. I will try my best to get up we are on a timeline, which puts us at about no later than 6 months. We have to make a decision. So I think we'll be able to make a decision before 6 months, but I do think that we can do this. I put everything in the kitchen sink in this budget draft, knowing that the likelihood of getting everything in the kitchen sink on a ballot question is unlikely. We may end up with just agreeing on one thing. We may agree on 2 things only with some guidelines. I just think it's worth us practicing democracy and talking amongst ourselves. And then I firmly believe, and I will fight very hard to make sure a question is given to the voters for them to make the ultimate decision. I think if anything, that should be the guiding principle for any elected official, is that their voters and the electorate should make that decision. And we, as elected officials, will make our arguments to our constituents as to where we think they should go, which is what we do anyway. But ultimately, I think that we would be better and more democratic if we put this up there to our voters. So thank you so much, everyone. It's 12:04. I'm going to officially close the hearing today. I look forward to our next working session. Have a good one.